The number your financial advisor wrote on a whiteboard is probably wrong. Not because it's too low, but because the math behind it was specifically designed for a client who stays afraid long enough to keep paying quarterly fees. There are $2 amounts buried inside the retirement system that actually change how your money behaves. And the second one, the one the wealth management industry has every financial incentive never to explain clearly, exposes something about the 4% rule that will make you genuinely angry once you understand what they've been doing with it. I'm going to give you both numbers today. But more than the numbers, I'm going to show you the mechanics underneath them. Because knowing a threshold without understanding the physics of why it exists is like knowing a speed limit without understanding what happens to your car when you exceed it. Here's what changes when you hit the first number. Compound interest stops being a side character and becomes the lead. Here's what changes when you hit the second. The fear the industry has been selling you runs out of mathematical justification entirely. And neither of these transitions happens where you've been told they do. By the way, I built a free early retirement calculator because most online ones are mathematically wrong. It uses BlackRock and Vanguard logic to expose the weak points in your plan. And I only ask for your email to send the report, so I don't store any of your financial data. Link is in the description. Now, I need a frame for everything I'm about to say. One mental model that runs through this entire video. Here it is. Escape velocity. Think about a rocket sitting on a launch pad. The first few thousand feet are brutal. Maximum fuel, maximum thrust. The rocket barely clears the tower. Every ounce of energy is going toward fighting one thing, gravity. From the ground, it looks almost hopeless. The progress is agonizingly slow relative to the effort being expended. But at a specific altitude, calculable, predictable, not gradual, something shifts. The gravitational pull weakens enough that momentum takes over. The same fuel suddenly produces dramatically different results. The rocket isn't fighting gravity anymore. It's riding physics. And here's the detail most people never consider about that transition. It doesn't happen across a long, slow plateau where things gradually get easier. It happens at a threshold, a specific number. Below it, you are the engine. Above it, the math is the engine, and you are the passenger. And in retirement savings, that threshold is not where you've been told it is. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you the second checkpoint, the one that demolishes the entire retirement income calculation you probably have in your head right now. But first, let me explain why the milestone most people are chasing has been wrong for over 30 years, and why nobody in the financial media bothered to update it. The claim you've probably heard goes like this. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's longtime business partner, gave a talk at USC in 1994. He told students that the first $100,000 was a brutal slog, and that you should do whatever it takes to get there. He was right about the psychology of it. He was right that crossing that threshold changes something in how compounding behaves. The problem is that every time someone repeats that quote in 2026, they're citing a number from a completely different economy. In 1994, a comfortable retirement cost roughly $500,000. A new house in America averaged about $154,000. A new car ran about $15,000. $100,000 represented roughly 20% of a retirement target. The math worked. That threshold meant something specific. In 2026, the purchasing power of $100,000 has eroded by more than 50% since Munger said that. The updated threshold, adjusted for what that original $100,000 actually represented in terms of gravitational escape, is $250,000. Not $200,000, not $300,000, $250,000. And the difference isn't aesthetic, it's mathematically specific, and I can show you exactly why. Say you're investing $12,000 a year, $1,000 a month. Aggressive, but achievable for someone in their mid-30s with solid household income, and you're getting 7% average annual return. That's roughly what the S&P 500 has delivered across any rolling 30-year period going back to the 1950s. Not cherry-picked years. Rolling averages, getting to your first $100,000 from zero, takes about 7 years at that pace. And here's the part that actually stings. Roughly 80% of that growth came from your own contributions. The market is providing maybe 20%. You are burning almost all the fuel yourself. Compound interest is the backup dancer. You're the headliner. You are the engine. Watch what happens as the balance climbs. Getting from 100,000 to 200,000 takes about 5 more years with those same inputs. Your contributions account for roughly 60% of the growth in that stretch. Investment returns are driving 40%. The physics are changing. Gravity is starting to lose its grip on you. But now you cross 250,000. The next 100,000 arrives in under 4 years. And for the first time in this entire journey, your investment returns are contributing more dollars to your portfolio's growth than your own savings are. The math has flipped. The market is now working harder for you than you are working for the market. That is escape velocity. That is the real checkpoint. Nobody puts a banner on the wall for it. There is no notification. No moment where your brokerage sends you a congratulatory email. You quietly cross a line that most people never know exists. And then they keep grinding as if nothing changed when everything has. I want to tell you about a guy named Marcus. He's a construction supervisor in Ohio. Makes about $75,000 a year, solidly middle class. Been putting money into his 401k for 16 years. Every paycheck. Automatic contribution. Company match on top. He checks his balance maybe twice a year. And last time he looked, he had around $230,000. Marcus is frustrated in a way that is genuinely heartbreaking once you understand the math. He's done everything right for 16 years. Packed lunches. Driven the same truck for 8 years. Skipped the family trip to Florida 4 separate times. And he's sitting there thinking, $230,000 is not retirement money. That's maybe I don't die broke money, not I stop working money. He's considering bumping his contributions, working weekends on the side. Marcus is roughly $20,000 away from escape velocity. He has absolutely no idea. Because here's what nobody told Marcus. At $250,000, at 7% annual return, without contributing another single dollar, his portfolio doubles to $500,000 in roughly 10 years. That's the rule of 72. Divide 72 by your return rate and you get your doubling period. At 7%, that's 10.3 years. But Marcus isn't going to stop contributing if he stays the course. Keeps contributing what he's contributing. He doesn't panic during the next correction. And there will be a correction. He crosses $800,000 before his early 60s. And that second number, $800,000, is where everything changes again, but in a completely different way. Because the second checkpoint isn't about how money grows. It's about how the fear stops having a mathematical basis to operate from. Now, before I get into that, I want to introduce you to the running thread that's going to weave through the rest of this video. There's a person I'll call David. David is the kind of situation I've encountered multiple times, and it illustrates something the statistics alone can never fully capture. David is 58 years old, project manager at a manufacturing company in the Midwest. He hit $800,000 in his retirement accounts 4 years ago at 54. The math cleared him at 54. His Social Security projection, combined with his spouse's benefit, totaled about $46,000 annually. A 5% withdrawal on $800,000 added $40,000. His working salary was $90,000. He could replace roughly 95% of his working income at 54 years old. He did not retire. He told himself he'd feel safe at $1 million. I'm going to come back to David, because what happened next is the part that reframes everything. Stay with me, because this next part changes the entire income calculation you've probably been running in your head. The conventional retirement story goes like this: save $1 million. Withdraw 4% annually. Sleep soundly. Never outlive your money. The story is so clean and so well packaged that most people never stop to ask where it actually came from. It came from a financial planner named William Bengen, who published research in 1994 analyzing every rolling 30-year retirement period going back to the 1880s. He wanted to find a withdrawal rate that survived the single worst retirement timing in over a century of American financial history. That turned out to be someone who retired in 1968, right before the stagflation of the 1970s hammered both stock valuations and purchasing power simultaneously, a double punch that no retirement plan would ever want to absorb. 4% survived that nightmare scenario. So Bengen called it the safe withdrawal rate. Note that word, safe, as in designed for the worst case. Here's what happened next. The financial industry took Bengen's floor, a rate deliberately calibrated for a once-in-a-century worst case, and remarketed it as the ceiling. The maximum sustainable withdrawal rate. The industry collectively said, if you can't live comfortably on 4%, you need more money. Keep saving, keep working, keep paying management fees while you do, and you'll know when you're ready. You will never be ready by their definition. That's the architecture of the incentive. You think the problem is that 4% is too conservative for your needs, but actually the problem is that 4% was never supposed to be your number at all. It was the floor Bengen built for the worst retiree in 140 years of data, and the industry sold it to you as the ceiling of what any retiree should expect. By the way, hit subscribe if you like the content. Otherwise, YouTube's algorithm may never show you my videos again. Michael Kitzes, the financial planning researcher that serious financial advisors quietly consult when they need rigorous answers rather than marketing copy, published an analysis working through the same historical data Bengen used, 115 rolling 30-year retirement scenarios going back to the 1870s. In more than half of those scenarios, retirees following the 4% rule didn't merely survive their retirements. They end up with more than double their starting portfolio at death. Retire with $800,000, withdraw 4% annually, and in over 50% of historical scenarios, you die with more than $1.6 million. Some scenarios in that dataset ended with 3 times the starting balance. 0 of those 115 scenarios ended with a fully depleted portfolio, not one. Bengen himself has since updated his own research. His revised estimate puts the sustainable rate closer to 4.7% in current market conditions. Kitzes' analysis suggests the historical average across all scenarios sits closer to 6%. 6, not 4. 6% of $800,000 is $48,000 per year from the portfolio alone. The average combined Social Security benefit for a married couple today, with both spouses collecting, is roughly $3,800 per month or $45,600 annually. Total retirement household income, approximately $93,600 per year from $800,000, not $1 million, not $1.2 million, $800,000. That is what the financial industry has every rational incentive never to explain clearly. Because if you understand that $800,000, structured correctly, replaces the majority of what most Americans earn at their peak income years, the argument for grinding another 5 years to hit a round number evaporates entirely. And so does 5 more years of management fees on a growing balance. The incentive structure makes the advice almost self-writing. I once had an advisor try to explain to me why I should move more of my portfolio into managed funds rather than index funds, using language that was technically accurate and practically meaningless. He said, "We provide downside protection." I said, "The S&P 500 returned about 10.5% annually over the last 30 years before fees. Your fund returned 8.2%. What exactly are you protecting me from?" He moved on to a different slide. We continued the meeting. We did not do business together. Now, I need to give you a calculation that actually maps to a real situation. Let me walk you through Sandra's numbers, because Sandra is the version of this story that lives closest to where a lot of viewers are right now. Sandra is 42 years old, household income of about $110,000. She currently has $180,000 spread across a 401k and a Roth IRA. She's been contributing $14,000 annually across both accounts. She's frustrated for the same reason Marcus is. 12 years of consistent discipline. And the balance doesn't feel anywhere close to retirement security. Here is Sandra's actual runway. At $180,000, contributing $14,000 annually at 7% growth, she crosses $250,000 escape velocity in fewer than 4 years. She is 46 years old, and the physics of her retirement savings have just permanently changed. From that moment forward, with the same contributions and same returns, she hits $800,000 in approximately 14 more years. Sandra is 56 years old. The math cleared her at 56. Her Social Security benefit, based on her earnings record, is probably around $2,200 a month. Her spouse's benefit adds roughly $1,500 monthly. Combined, that's $44,400 annually from Social Security alone. A 5% withdrawal on $800,000 adds another $40,000 per year. Total annual household income, $84,400. Her effective federal tax rate in retirement, with some Roth exposure allowing her to manage her taxable income, is likely under 12%. Sandra has replaced over 75% of her working household income at 56 years old. Not 65, not when Medicare kicks in automatically. 56. The biggest threat to Sandra's plan is not a market crash. It's not sequence of returns risk. It's not a recession. The biggest threat is that she looks at her balance at 44 during a bad market year. Maybe it's temporarily dropped back to $165,000, and she decides the whole project is too slow, too uncertain, too far from the finish line. That is the failure mode, not the math. And this is where the behavioral data becomes genuinely alarming. Vanguard's research team publishes investor behavior data every year, not how investors say they'd behave during a drawdown in a survey, but what their account activity actually shows. During the 2022 market decline, the S&P 500 dropped roughly 18% that year. Investors who made emotionally driven trades locked in average losses nearly twice as severe as those who held through it. Not because the market didn't recover. It recovered essentially in full within 16 months. But they sold into the decline and bought back in after the recovery, which is functionally the same as buying high and selling low with an extra step in the middle. Now think about where that panic trigger fires with the most force. Not when your balance is $20,000. You don't lose sleep over a $2,000 paper loss. The anxiety scales with the balance. A 10% correction on $250,000 is $25,000 gone on paper in 3 weeks. That is a real number. That is a car. That is a year of tuition. And for most investors, the first time they experience a drawdown of that magnitude on a balance they've spent years building, the emotional pull toward doing something is almost irresistible. This is why escape velocity is a psychological concept just as much as a mathematical one. Crossing $250,000 means crossing into the zone where the temptation to make a catastrophically expensive behavioral mistake is at its sharpest. The balance is now large enough to trigger genuine fear, but you're not yet at a point where the portfolio's own momentum can fully absorb a short-term behavioral error and recover cleanly. You have to have decided before the correction happens how you're going to behave during it. You cannot build that discipline in the moment, in the clouds, when your gut is screaming. There's a concept from instrument flight training that maps onto this almost exactly. When pilots learn to fly without visual reference to the ground inside clouds, zero visibility instructors spend enormous time teaching something called spatial disorientation. Your inner ear tells you the aircraft is level when it's banking steeply. Your body feels like you're climbing when you're descending. The instruments say one thing. Your gut says the opposite. And the training is not trust your instruments because they're right. The training is distrust your gut specifically because it will feel correct when it is catastrophically wrong. You have to wire that expectation into your decision making before you enter the clouds. You cannot build it once you're already inside them. A 20% market correction is clouds. The instruments are Kitz's, Bengen, 115 historical scenarios, 0 complete failures. Your gut will tell you to get out. The historical evidence will tell you to hold. You will feel absolutely certain your gut has special information this time. It almost certainly doesn't. Here's where it gets really interesting. There's a layer underneath everything I've described that most people only discover late enough that they can't do much about it. The tax architecture of your retirement accounts. Hitting $800,000 in a traditional 401k is not the same mathematical event as hitting $800,000 across a mix of account types. If your entire $800,000 is sitting in a traditional 401k, which is where most people's money ends up by default, because that's what HR departments set up. And most people never look past the default. Every dollar you withdraw in retirement is taxed as ordinary income at a 12% marginal federal rate, which is achievable for a lot of retirees. Every $100,000 you withdraw costs $12,000 in federal taxes. Over 20 years of retirement, that compounds into a very substantial drag on your total lifetime income. But if you've built Roth exposure alongside your traditional accounts, you can choose which bucket you pull from each year. In a year where your income is low, you pull from the traditional account and pay the tax. In a year where you're near a bracket threshold, you pull from Roth instead, zero additional federal tax. You're not moving more money around. You're choosing which dollars to spend in which year and managing your taxable income deliberately. The difference in total lifetime tax burden between a fully traditional 401k retirement and a mixed account retirement can easily reach 6 figures over a 20-year drawdown. Not in complicated strategies, in simple, boring, structural choices made during the accumulation phase. And here's the thing about that flexibility. You have to build it before you need it. Roth conversions become exponentially more expensive as your balance grows, because converting a meaningful portion of $700,000 without spiking your taxable income into a punishing bracket requires years of lower income windows to execute efficiently. The time to build this architecture is now, in the accumulation phase, when you have time and options and nothing urgent is forcing your hand. The default everything in a traditional 401k, because your employer set it up that way and you never changed it, is the option that maximizes two things simultaneously: government tax revenue and advisor fee revenue. It is almost never the option that maximizes your retirement income. Let me come back to David, because the story has a chapter I haven't told you yet. David hit $1 million. He told himself 1 million was the safe number, and the math on 4% suddenly felt real. Then he hit $1,200,000 and pushed the target to 1.4 million, because 1.2 started to feel like maybe not enough, given inflation, given healthcare costs, given whatever the financial news was saying that week. He is now 62 years old, $1.4 million, still driving into work every Monday morning, still sitting in quarterly reviews, still managing people who are 2 decades younger than him and would like his job. And then his wife received a health diagnosis. Not catastrophic, but serious enough. The kind that functions like a very clear message about the finite and non-negotiable nature of time. David walked into his manager's office and gave notice the following week. He retired with $1.4 million, approximately $51,000 in combined annual Social Security benefits, and a 5% withdrawal rate, generating $70,000 from the portfolio. Total annual household income, $121,000. His working salary had been $90,000. He replaced 134% of his working income in retirement. David does not sit around wishing he had saved more during those extra 4 years. He has more retirement income than he earned at his peak. What he regrets is something the financial industry's framework had no category for. He regrets 4 years of his wife's health that they spent mostly in 2 different offices in 2 different cities. He regrets the skiing trips they didn't take when her knees were still good. He regrets that the early years of their retirement are now partially structured around medical appointments. The math cleared at $800,000. Nobody gave him a framework honest enough to say so. His portfolio manager collected 4 more years of fees on a growing balance. His financial advisor kept the client relationship active. His employer got 4 more years from a reliable project manager. Nobody in that arrangement had a structural incentive to tell David, the math cleared, go live your life. That is the system working exactly as designed. There's a study from the Employee Benefit Research Institute that tracks retirement spending patterns across a broad sample of retirees. What they found is that nearly half of retirees spend significantly less than their financial plans would safely support in the first several years of retirement. Not because the money isn't there, because the fear of running out functions as a behavioral anchor so powerful that it prevents people from spending what the math says they can spend. They built escape velocity. They never used it. Let me give you the framework I actually use to think about all 3 stages. Below $250,000, you are the primary engine. Every dollar of growth in the portfolio is mostly from you. Compound interest is a supporting actor. The job is brutally simple. Maximize savings rate, capture every employer match. That is an immediate 100% return on the matched portion before the market does anything at all, and contribute to tax-advantaged accounts first, always. The math rewards pure effort at this level. There is no optimization strategy sophisticated enough to overcome an insufficient savings rate when you're still fighting gravity. From $250,000 to $800,000, compound interest has become your co-pilot. Your contributions still matter, but your portfolio's own growth is increasingly driving the vehicle. The job changes entirely. Now the primary variables are allocation, expense ratios, and tax architecture. This is where the fee conversation stops being abstract and becomes urgent and specific. A 1% annual management fee on $300,000 compounded over 30 years costs you approximately $170,000 in foregone growth. $170,000. That is not a small rounding error. That is years of retirement income handed to a fund manager whose performance data, per Vanguard's own analysis, shows that roughly 80 to 90% of actively managed funds underperform their benchmark index over 15-year periods. You're paying 1% for a service that statistically makes you worse off the overwhelming majority of the time. Above $800,000, you are statistically, historically, and almost certainly going to be fine. I want to say that clearly because the industry's entire operating model depends on you never fully believing it. The risk at this level is not running out of money. The data does not support that fear as a primary risk. The actual risks are psychological. Spending too little because the fear keeps running even after its mathematical basis has expired, or making an emotionally driven allocation mistake at the exact moment when the portfolio needed momentum to carry you through a temporary drawdown. Above $800,000, escape velocity isn't just possible, it's already happened. The rocket is in orbit. Firing the engines in the wrong direction at this altitude is the danger, not the gravity you already escaped. One more thing that deserves to be said directly, because most financial content skips it to avoid complexity. The $800,000 threshold I've been describing assumes a diversified, low-cost, equity-weighted portfolio that has been held through market cycles. Not a portfolio that was moved to cash in March of 2020 because someone saw a news headline. Not a portfolio paying 1.5% annually to an active manager who underperformed the index for 8 consecutive years. Not a portfolio concentrated in a single sector because someone got confident at exactly the wrong time. The Math, Kitces, and Bengen document operates on portfolios with certain structural properties. Change those properties through fear, through fees, through concentration, and the math changes with them. The 2 checkpoints are real. They require specific conditions to function. 3 practical takeaways. Here's what to actually do with everything I've said. First, recalibrate the milestone from $100,000 to $250,000. The Munger quote is from a different economy, and everyone who's been repeating it without updating the number has been doing you a disservice. Below $250,000, the work is savings rate. Every additional dollar you can contribute matters more at this stage than any allocation optimization you could make. Above $250,000, the work changes to fees, tax efficiency, and behavioral discipline. Prepare for that shift explicitly, because most financial content never distinguishes between the 2 phases. And treating them as the same job is part of why people grind through escape velocity without noticing the transition happened. Second, understand that the 4% rule is a floor that the financial industry reshaped into a ceiling. Bengen built it for the worst retirement timing in over a century of historical data. Not the median, not the typical, the outlier worst case. Kitz's research puts the historical average sustainable withdrawal rate across all scenarios at roughly 6%. Bengen himself revised his own estimate upward to 4.7%. If your retirement planning has been built around 4% as the maximum safe withdrawal rate, you may be significantly underestimating what your portfolio can actually support. And if you're sitting at $800,000 or beyond, still extending your working years to pad a number the math has already cleared, understand with precision what the trade-off actually is. You're not buying additional security. You're purchasing a statistical cushion you are very unlikely to need at the cost of time you cannot recover. Third, build your tax architecture now, not when you need it. The $800,000 threshold is powerful. It's more powerful with money distributed across account types, traditional 401k, Roth IRA, potentially a taxable brokerage, than with all of it sitting in one pre-tax bucket. The ability to control which dollars you spend in which year, to manage your annual taxable income deliberately, to avoid Medicare premium surcharges by staying below bracket thresholds. That flexibility doesn't appear automatically at retirement. You construct it deliberately during the years when you still have time and lower income windows and the full range of options available. The window for Roth conversions closes as the balance grows and your income stays high. Start now, not later. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes. The system will keep collecting on your confusion, your fear, and your misunderstanding of where the actual checkpoints are. It will do it politely. With a quarterly statement formatted in a way that tells you your balance and your rate of return, and almost nothing that actually matters about when the math cleared and what the evidence actually says about how much you can safely spend. The prospectus will be 47 pages long. The important part is 2 sentences on page 31. Now you know what to look for.